Welcome to the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville here on the Fandom Podcast Network. And we got a fun show here for you guys. This is Union Federation episode 196, and we are discussing Star Trek The Next Generation Descent, part 1 and 2. We are celebrating Star Trek The Next Generation because we love those two-part episodes. And I got to get my crew here with me to discuss this. I need some counseling. So I need the ship's counselor to really kind of deal with my emotions here because I'm feeling kind of angry. So I'd like to welcome the lovely Amy Nelson. What's going on?
Hey, doing well. And we are going to get those emotions nice and happy and excited and feeling all the love for Star Trek.
Yeah. And I did want to mention and remind people that we're also on the BQN as well. So we're celebrating the BQN. And what's going on over there real quick?
Hey, we've started our view screen, which is our YouTube show. That's going on over there. We're getting our cooking show coming back. It's very exciting. We've got Trexperts quiz going. So lots to watch and listen to over there.
Awesome. I'm excited. I love peeking in on that chat too. It's a lot of fun. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, we're talking Star Trek, but I can't go any further until I get my brother from another mother, co-founder of the Fandom Podcast Network, my co-captain and security and weapons officer, Mr. Kyle Wagner. What's up, buddy?
Stop it. Stop up. Okay, I just turned off the emotion chip. We're good now, guys. Amy, you won't have to worry about me and emotions for this episode.
Oh, we got some emotions to talk about. This is Star Trek The Next Generation we're talking, and we are having a little fun with Star Trek The Next Generation. This is our 9-episode limited podcast. We're celebrating all of the 8 Star Trek Next Generation 2-part episodes. Final episode, we'll do a little wrap up and also discuss the other popular non-TNG 2-part episodes. And as of this recording, guys, 2024, it's been 30 years since Star Trek The Next Generation TV episodes have left us. And so we wanted to revisit and celebrate our fandom of TNG and the nostalgia. And we thought that we would, showcase the 2-part episodes. So we've got a lot here. We started with Best of Both Worlds. We did Redemption, Unification, Time's Arrow, Chain of Command. Recently did Birthright. Now we're doing Descent. Next one we have is Gambit. So we got a lot to cover here on the Union Federation podcast. So you guys ready for some fun?
Yes. And can I just say how wonderful this is? And I hope you listeners have been going along with the ride with us, because I am watching them in order. Like this episode, I'm like, we're talking about control and torture again with Geordi. Like we just talked about that with Chain of Command. And it's like they are sort of all interconnected. And I'm loving that with this Next Generation, how they're just pulling strings, especially we'll talk about that with Crusher, but we're talking about, Worf and his everything. It's just, and like with Data talking with his father, like previously, and now we're dealing with his brother and that tie-in. It's just wonderful seeing the connections. And I wouldn't have been able to make those connections without watching just the 2-parters. So this has been really fun.
There's a lot of connected tissue with this series, and it's paid off in dividends, and they carry it to the movies, and we will discuss that a little bit later. But guys, let's get into the first away mission here. Here we go. All right, so what we have is the episode breakdown, our Admiral's episode mission log here for Descent Part 1. And Amy, let us know, was this a season-ending cliffhanger, or was it a mid-season 2-parter?
Well, this one was a season-ending cliffhanger, and my goodness, we've got part of our team captured. Oh, what a cliffhanger. Now, that aired on June 21st, 1993. And so we had to wait all the way to September 18th to get the conclusion.
A whole darn summer.
I know.
Definitely. Yeah,
Well,
that was awesome.
Well, in comparison to seasons of Game of Thrones breaks, that's not that bad.
yeah.
Hey, this primed us for these very, very long times in between seasons. Now we're getting years, which sucks sometimes. But yeah, that summer took forever. So go ahead, Amy, hit us up with part one of our Admiral's Log Synopsis of Descent, part one.
All right. Well, we get a wonderful opening with on the holodeck, Lieutenant Commander Data plays a game of poker with his holographic representations of Sir Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and Stephen Hawking's, which I guess at the time would be a holographic representation. So
Yeah.
Data explains to Newton that the game is an experiment for understanding how three of history's greatest minds would interact in such a setting. He suspends the program when red alert is issued from the bridge. The Enterprise responds to a distress call from a Starfleet outpost. Riker, Worf, Data, and security guard from an away team. They find the crew of the outpost dead. They are suddenly attacked by a group of Borg. Riker notices that, in contrast to previous encounters, the Borg are armed with energy weapons and refer to each other as individuals. Data experiences anger while fighting a Borg and breaks the Borg's neck. One Borg begins talking to himself about the nature of the away team members and appears to signal a withdrawal when he sees that Data is an android. Meanwhile, in orbit, an unidentified ship fires on the Enterprise, which returns fire. The alien ship beams up the remaining Borg from the outpost and flees, with the Enterprise in pursuit. The Borg ship suddenly enters a vortex and disappears. On the planet's surface, Riker asks Data what happened, but Data can only explain that he felt anger. The away team is beamed back on board, and Admiral Nechayev arrives to take command of the situation. She reprimands Picard for not destroying the Borg when he had the chance, and orders him to do so if another opportunity presents itself. Data continues to try to understand what caused his behavior on the outpost. He tries to experience emotion again, though simulations of the event, but does not succeed. The Borg ship reappears and attacks another outpost. The Enterprise is once again the nearest ship, which makes Picard suspicious, since there are now several Starfleet vessels patrolling the area. The Borg ship re-enters the vortex and disappears. When the Enterprise intercepts, the Enterprise is caught in its wake and follows. When the ships have exited the vortex, the Borg attack the Enterprise, beaming drones onto the bridge. After a brief fight, the one drone is killed and another wounded, but the distraction allows the Borg ship to escape. This, too, is unusual Borg behavior since they have always reclaimed their drones, whether alive or dead. The crew discovers that the vortex takes them from one star system to another almost instantaneously. They do not know how it is activated, though, so they are unable to return to Federation space. Data is sent to speak with the captured Borg in an attempt to gather intelligence, but the drone manipulates Data into releasing him, and they escape together in a shuttlecraft. Before the Enterprise can catch the shuttle, it disappears into a conduit. The crew have learned how the conduits are activated, and the Enterprise gives chase, tracking the shuttlecraft to a planet. An away team finds no trace of Data or the Borg, and something in the planet's atmosphere is blocking their sensors. So Picard decides to conduct a ground search utilizing nearly the whole crew of the Enterprise. Only a skeleton crew now remain on board under the command of Dr. Crusher. Searching the planet, Picard, Troy, and security officer and LaForge enter a building and are surrounded by noisy Borg. Their leader, appearing on a platform, resembles Data, but Troy recognizes that it's Data's brother, Lore. Data appears alongside Lore and announces that together They will destroy the Federation. Dun, dun,
Dun,
dun.
dun, dun. Yeah, there you go. All right. Okay, so just a quick question. Did you guys originally see this when it aired? Because I had a question.
I
No?
did.
You did, Kyle? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So at this time, when we were watching the last episode of the current season, which in this case was season 6, were we getting smart to the idea that this could be a cliffhanger since they did it the previous season and they've done it before? Or did this catch you off guard going, wait a minute, no, we can't wait to find out what happens with evil Data and now Lore?
Okay, so after Best of Both Worlds, anything was on the table. When you end with how you did on Best of Both Worlds, nothing.
Because they never did Descent Part 1 at the beginning. It was just Descent, you know?
Yeah, but when you're watching the time and you're realizing the date and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be a cliffhanger episode, because we're getting towards the end of the run of Next Generation, so they're trying to still keep the general populace interested as well. What better way to do that than with a cliffhanger season finale?
Yeah, I remember this. I remember watching it live going, oh, I don't think at the time I was expecting it to be a cliffhanger, but then I was just like, I'm not surprised. Oh.
Right. Because by now we've had 2 in the middle of a season.
Yeah.
Right. So we're now getting used to it.
Yeah. So, let's get your reactions to when you first saw it and what was it like rewatching it, Amy?
You know, okay. On my rewatch, I always remembered when Data is the Borg and he's reacting, trying to get that. I, for some reason, always put that in the movie Generations. And every time I watch Generations, I'm asking, now, when did Data have his emotions? Because I always
stop when he's trying to he's trying to invoke his anger in the
the simulation. Right? Yeah. And I always associate it with Generations. And so when I watch Generations, I'm always surprised. Where is this scene? Have I made this up in my mind? So yes, this is Data in Descent. And this is, I feel, what makes Generations successful. Because we do get to see a little bit of emotion here. And although it is one note and being, forced upon him, I guess you could say, by lore, that it's not really a natural thing. I love that Genesis, and that just goes through. So that, to me, when I rewatch this, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. This is that scene. And I love that.
What about you, Kyle? What was like rewatching this after seeing it so many years ago?
So as far as rewatching it goes, it's funny because while Amy connects it to Generations, I actually connect it more to First Contact because of the scene when Data turns off his emotion chip and Picard goes, Data, you have how much I envy you at times.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
But so that's where I kind of tie.
That's where he goes.
Yeah. And but I also want to talk about seeing this for the first time, and because I really feel, especially season 6 and season 7, but especially a lot of things that happened in season 6 really felt like this is what we were building to with Data, because Data was kind of going through this whole versions of self-discovery, especially through this season. So to climax with something like this as your season finale made perfect sense. And I know we're going to talk more about Brent and his performance later, but I truly do believe if Brent Spiner had his say, he would always play the bad version of Data because he is having way too much fun doing it.
Yeah. What's funny is the scene when they first show up and I think it's Troy says, this looks like some type of meeting room. And there's like Borg flags everywhere. I'm like, we got to get out of here. And like, you can tell that, that's what I'm thinking. But Picard was like, yeah, we got to get out of here. But it was too late. I just thought that was kind of funny. It's great to revisit this and just remembering all the tension and just the burn that Data was getting here. And, wondering if he was going to be able to turn bad. And then we find out that he does turn and we get that awesome ending. Hey, I'm here with my brother and we're going to take you guys out, you know? So yeah, definitely fun.
I actually do have a question too. And I'm curious what you guys think, because this is, I always equate these episodes, even though we had the Hugh episode earlier, but these really are the episodes where you're like, wow, they're drastically changing the Borg in these episodes. They're really evolving them into something else. And I know for a lot of people, there's still that, I don't know if I like this or not kind of thing. I was curious of what you guys were thinking of with what they did with the Borg in these episodes, especially with the revelation, especially first time seeing it with the revelations. Like, this is like a totally different type of Borg. What's going on here?
Well, I want to keep our thoughts to just the first episode here. I don't want to go into the second episode right now, but I do remember being surprised that because we're going to get into the second episode more, so I don't want to bleed into that conversation. But I do remember being surprised, especially when you see the one taking note of his fallen comrade and then calling something. I'm like, wait a minute, he's talking like a normal person here, but he's dressed like a Borg. What the hell is going on? And so going at the end of this episode, Amy, you're wondering like, what?
Yeah. Well, when they were on the bridge, they were fast acting. Like
Yeah.
they were, and it was like, no, the Borg are not moving fast like that. That was, you know, so there was already something different with that.
And Kyle, you know, I think the reaction that we were having as fans was the same that was brought to the observation table when they're giving the report to Picard, and how like Riker goes, they fought like Klingons, and he looks over Worf going, no offense, you know, and that how brutal they were, and systematically they were, and they were looking at killing you, not assimilating you.
Yeah, and that's why I think it was more important with the first episode, because the initial shock of that. Plus, we have the whole scene with Picard and the Admiral, where the Admiral just basically rips Picard a new one for not wiping out the Borg when he had a chance.
Yeah, not killing Hugh. Yeah, that's a good point. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, because
I wanted to give a shout out to another article that I found here, and this is done by StarTrek.com. This was published recently too, last year, June of 2023. The sixth and final season of Star Trek Generation Descent Part 1 made its way to television screens in June 21st. But the one thing I pulled from this was that we get some really cool guest stars in this. And more specifically, we got to shout out Mr. Stephen Hawking here. Legendary scientist Dr. Stephen Hawking playing a holographic version of himself in the episode Owner, where history's greatest minds, including Sir Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein, joined Data in a game of poker. Orchestrating the setting, the android is curious to see how they would react as he viewed the nature of the forum as an insightful look into one of the many facets of humanity. A longtime Star Trek fan, Dr. Hawking was the only actor to play himself in the franchise. The opportunity arose following his visit to the Paramount lot to shoot a promotion for A Brief History in Time. Among the tour of sets, including the bridge of the Star Trek Next Generation, he asked to be taken from his wheelchair, a rare request, in order to sit in the captain's chair. He relayed to his host, Leonard Nimoy, quote, "It was rather more comfortable and a lot more powerful than my wheelchair," before wondering if he could appear on the show. The writers of the series began plotting a profound scene for him when executive producer Michael Piller suggested the innocent premise of a poker game. On appearing alongside Hawking, Brent Spiner recalled the moment as, quote, "perhaps my favorite moment in the entire experience of Star Trek." Now, I have some related trivia, but I want to get your guys' response to this, because I felt like Hawking really had, he came into, a lot of people didn't know who he was. And at the time, I didn't realize that he was a real person. I didn't know who Stephen Hawking was when I first, saw this live. It wasn't until later I figured it out, and they ended up, doing Star Trek stuff about him. But I thought this was a big deal, I guess, at the time. Amy, I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I was already at university by then and was, taking all my math classes. And so obviously had, familiar with Stephen Hawking. And so to see him on Star Trek, I was like, what? I mean, it was pretty darn cool. And I'm like, how is Star Trek getting all these gets with all the actors, first with Whoopi Goldberg, and, these actors keep showing up incognito you know, even in full makeup and aliens and like that dude, the fish dude, rocker, Nix,
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Mac,
what?
Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, Fleetwood Mac.
Maniac.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, it's like all these people want to show up on Star Trek. So
And
I absolutely
they had
loved it.
Lakers James Worthy as a very tall Klingon in an episode too.
I remember
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
just
everyone
started getting
wanted
these
to be
people,
on
yeah.
Star Trek. Yeah.
Yeah. Kyle.
I think especially this guest appearance, because I knew who Hawking was, and people always kind of saw him. Oh, he's the smart guy in the wheelchair with the computer voice. That's how a lot of people initially saw him. I think having him on, even though it was so late in the run of Star Trek, and we had already seen a lot of celebrities find a way to get into Star Trek. I think for a lot of people, though, in a scientific thought process, having him come on this show, especially at that era, really was a stamp in the of approval from the scientific community for Star Trek: The Next Generation. For
Ooh,
Hawking
good point.
to go on there, put a sense of legitimacy to some of the science that Star Trek had covered and the things that they talk about, where it made people realize, okay, maybe not all this is just science fiction mumbo jumbo. You know, there's some legitimacy to what they talk about here. Otherwise, Stephen Hawking wouldn't have come on. And you let Stephen Hawking be a fanboy himself and enjoy having this incredible experience on Star Trek as well. But I think it really brought people to another level in appreciating the science of Star Trek.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point, Kyle.
It is.
And what I also what's funny too is you don't really realize how funny Stephen Hawking is. And he got a resurgence in fandom with the Big Bang Theory. He played himself. And I love the fact that he got into pop culture again. And I got some related trivia here, which I thought was kind of funny. It says in his foreword of The Physics of Star Trek, Hawking jokingly wrote that after, quote, winning the holodeck card game, he called Paramount Pictures to try to cash in his Chips Federation credits, but they didn't know how the exchange rate was. That was pretty funny.
He should know there's no money in the future.
While appearing as a guest star, he asked the crew for a tour of the Enterprise. When he saw the warp drive, he says, I'm working on that.
Nice.
And when Stephen Hawking says, "Ron again, Albert," it's a reference to the professor's life in physics. He disapproves of Albert Einstein's theory. So there you go. All right, guys. The next thing I want to talk about, I know you'll enjoy this, Amy, is Data experiencing his first emotions in this first part 1 descent. His anger and pleasure after killing the Borg. Data shows concern over experiencing his first emotion, anger. There's a great scene where he's in council with Deanna discussing his emotions, including his pleasure of killing the Borg. And I thought we'd invoke a little Union Federation Theater Playhouse, Amy. If you don't mind, I'd like you to read the Deanna parts of this scene, and I'll read the Data.
Absolutely, because this is just one of my scenes. And I have quoted Deanna. I mean, she's spot on. So,
yeah.
To Data. We've served together for a long time, and I think I've become to know you pretty well. I have to believe if you ever reach your goal of becoming human, you won't become a bad one.
Data replying to Deanna. I wish I were as confident as you, Counselor. When I was fighting the Borg, I felt angry. When I think back on that incident, I realize I was also experiencing another sensation. It was not the same as anger, but I think it was an emotion.
When exactly did you feel this emotion?
It was just after I killed the Borg. I looked at his body. I felt something.
If you had to give this feeling a name, what would you call it?
I believe it was pleasure. And the scene ends with a concerned look on Troy's face and ominous music.
Yes. And I'm telling you, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing this.
Yeah, that's the look.
Oh, that's a look of horror, scared.
You don't want to ever have your
Sad.
counselor,
Yes.
you know, or guidance counselor or therapist look at you like that, right?
Right? Oh my gosh. Marina, excellent. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Amy, do you have any thoughts on that scene? You mentioned it's one of your favorites.
Yeah. Well, and later, she's saying to Data, um, why aren't you trying to, you know, reenact anger? And he's
Yeah.
like, well, because anger is a bad emotion. And she's like, emotions are not good or bad. It's what you do with those emotions. And then she gives a great example like anger. If you are angry at something and injustice, then you want to fix the situation so that it no longer happens. And that is a good outcome from this anger that you feel. And like that, just simple example, talking to Data, so many people need to learn this. Like your emotions that you feel them, but don't act
Yeah.
on every single emotion. But the feelings are valid.
Yeah. Kyle.
So first off, props to Marina because it's even though she has the lines, it's her body language and her facial expressions throughout this entire scene that really sell it. But what makes it even more powerful too is when you think about it with Data and he's experiencing this emotion for the first time. Even though we see him as it's an adult actor, it's somebody we've come to know. He is basically a newborn child with emotion. He has no idea how to control it. He has no idea what it truly means. He has no idea what it is. And then when he expresses having a feeling of pleasure after killing the Borg, there's fear there because you're like, this could be an incredibly powerful being and dangerous person if he can't control his emotions or understand his emotions. And you're thinking to yourself, this is somebody you care about, but what happens if this goes bad? What do we do? And that you have all these seeds planted in Deanna's head at that point, even though she's the ship's counselor, she has her own just sense of fear of what she's hearing and what she's seeing, because in the back of her mind, she knows what Data uncontrolled could be. And that's what makes that scene even that much more intense and scary when you really stop and think about it. And that's just what that intensity is what makes this scene stand out in this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a great prelude to what was going to happen, and you're kind of wondering, like, what's going on with this? Why is he feeling this way? And seeing the concern on Deanna's face and just the tension in that scene is great. So yeah. All right, the next topic regarding this first part of Descent, we'll talk about Corrosis here. I love this guy. I remember playing with his card in the Star Trek collectible card game, and he had some cool abilities. So this is the Borg, the captured Borg with some individuality. His capture was planned to literally flip the switch on Data and turn Data. Corrosis to Data says, if it meant that you could feel emotion again, the way you did on Anyanka 3, would you kill your friend? Would you kill Geordi? And then Data goes, yes, I would, with pleasurable emotion. But what I really like about this scene, guys, obviously it's a setup, okay, because he flips a little switch on his arm and you see Data just click, something changes. But what I like about it is his deflection of Picard's questions, trying to figure out who he is, what he's doing. Like he asks him what's his destination or what's his designation, and he says the one's going to destroy you, the one. And when Picard starts asking more specific questions, Corrosis is smart enough to know, I'm going to change the subject or deflect your answers and not give you anything. And he starts talking about how he can kill the Klingon with this vertebrae and how he can kill the human with this vertebrae. And it's a scene I didn't really appreciate until I rewatched it, because it's crucial. I love the fact that we get this other Borg that's not Hugh, that's showing some individuality. Kyle, I want to go back to you on this. So what did you think of this scene?
I think in a brief moment, Corrosis became one of the most terrifying Star Trek villains of all time.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I love it. Oh,
because you see now you have somebody with the power of a Borg, but somebody who has emotion, but there's no conscious with that emotion. It's pure manipulation, and he's obviously a master manipulator. And it's not only how he manipulates Data, obviously with a little help from the tech and stuff like that, but he pushes the buttons and guides Data that right way. And again, it's like having this child, and it's who's there to mold him in that moment. And that's what's really scary. But I think what's even more powerful about Coriolis in the scene is you talk about him deflecting with Picard and talking about how he would kill each thing to try and just knock them off of what they expect from him being a Borg. But then when Picard plays, I'm the cutest of Borg, you will answer me, and he just like it's nothing to him at all. That's for the fans when the holy crap moment really hits in. It's like, what the hell are we dealing with here? And he is so pure evil in how he manipulates Data in this scene and just points Data in the direction that he wants him to go. It just makes him terrifying.
That's a great point, Kyle. It's someone who's terrifying and still behind, the bars, so to speak. Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah. It's tough at this point because we know who found Croesus. Well, and so as evil as he is, he himself is being manipulated. And so it's like, how much do we put on him? And I wish that we didn't see. Well, I wish that we didn't see Data facing Croesus when he did that push thing, and you can see it that there's a little light, and Data is facing him, watching him do this. And I'm like, Data, why are you not saying, "Oh, what did you do?" Like, that was a bit of a stretch for me.
It was kind of instantaneously though when on the rewatch, or at least within a second, you see him, he clicks it, and then all of a sudden you see Data react to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I think he'd be faster, I guess.
I'll counter that point with you, Amy, because as quickly as Data reacts to it, all of a sudden that emotion's starting to pour in again, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So it throws Data off his game. Instead of asking questions, he's like, what all of a sudden he's feeling again. So if you think about that, he's getting this experience that he's been searching for again through the whole episode to recreate, and all of a sudden, bam, he's feeling it, and he doesn't quite understand what's going on, and so he's probably in this a little bit of state of confusion for him. So he's not at the top of his Data game to stop and think, hey, what did you just do here? Because all of a sudden he's got this emotion that he's been trying to capture since the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
I think actually there's a new chapter they added to the famous Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The last chapter says how to distract an android. So there you go. All right, guys. The next episode, Admiral's Log Plot Synopsis. Let's get into this. This is Descent Part 2. As you mentioned, Amy, we had to wait till September 18th, 3 days after my birthday, by the way. Good birthday weekend, though. Let's get the synopsis for Part 2 here, please.
All right. Well, Lore has discovered a way to give Data emotions and has turned him against the Federation. Lore plans to lead the breakaway group of Borg to destroy all organic life. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at that. It's just ridiculous. Believing that Lore and Data are perfect life forms. Picard, Troy, and LaForge are taken captive. Lore orders LaForge visor removed. LaForge tells Picard and Troy that the visor enabled him to see a carrier wave being beamed from Lore to Data, and they surmise that this is the source of Data's emotions and Lore's control over him. In orbit, the Borg ship is detected, and Dr. Crusher, acting as captain, orders the away team to be beamed back aboard the planet. There is not enough time to retrieve them all, and 47 crew members remain on the planet. Riker orders Crusher to leave the area and come back only when it is safe, since the rogue Borg vessel has detected the Enterprise. Rather than leave the system, Crusher orders the crew to take the ship into the star. Using the technology developed by the Ferengi scientist Dr. Rega, they modify the shields to allow them to get closer to the star than the Borg can. They use the ship's phasers to trigger an eruption on the star's surface, which destroys the Borg ship. On the planet, Lore orders Data to perform an experiment on LaForge's brain, an irreversible procedure with a 60% chance of being lethal. LaForge pleads with Data, who ignores him and continues setting up the process. In their prison cell, the away team constructs a device which they believe will reactivate Data's morality subroutines, hoping that he will question his unethical actions and Lore's intentions. Riker and Worf encounter Hugh, who tells them that Lore is the leader of this Borg group. He says that one at a time, Lore's help was necessary, but at one time, Lore's help was necessary, but that he has destroyed many Borg through brutal experimentation. Hugh's group are rebel Borg, attempting to remove Lore from power. The away team manages to reactivate Data's ethical programming just as he is about to start the irreversible part of the experiment. LaForge pleads with Data, asking him to check his conscience. Data falters, claims there are anomalies in the experiment, and postpones it. Lore begins to doubt Data's devotion and attempts to strengthen control by threatening to remove the emotions he has provided. Data appears to be subservient, but Lore remains suspicious and orders Data to prove his loyalty by killing Picard. Data refuses as the rebooting of his morality subroutine is complete. Two Borg seize Data, and Lore is about to execute him when Riker and Worf arrive, accompanied by Hugh and some of the rebel Borg. A battle commences, and Lore flees, pursued by Data. In their ensuing confrontation, Lore attempts to talk Data into escaping with him. When Data is unswayed, Lore attacks Data, but Data shoots him with a phaser and then deactivates him. In the aftermath, Hugh becomes leader of the Borg group, and the Enterprise returns to Federation space. Data reports that Lore is to be disassembled permanently and that he intends to destroy the emotion chip as it is too dangerous, citing the harm he has inflicted under its influence. LaForge intervenes and advises him to keep the chip until he is ready.
There we go. All right.
That's a friend right there.
All right, let's get your reactions. I remember waiting and being really excited about seeing this and what was going to happen. And the return of Hugh, Jonathan Del Arco, another thing. We're definitely going to touch on him a little bit more. But Kyle, let me get your thoughts of instant reactions and your new reactions.
So, instant reactions, it was a very memorable episode for a lot of different reasons because of how much it added to Star Trek lore, especially the emotion chip, everything with the Borg, and obviously, and I know we'll get into it a little bit deeper, but in my opinion, the best Beverly Crusher moment in Star Trek: The Next Generation, as far as the show goes. So it threw a lot of things in the rewatch of this. You almost feel like in some ways there's too much going on in this episode. You're so overloaded because it's just so intense with everything that's going on. And maybe you kind of, in some ways, wish you got a little bit more time to play up on what Data was going through, per se. But it's one of the most intense episodes of Next Generation. And the truth of the matter is, I think they played it up so well, and especially Brent Spiner, about, is he going to go through with this or is he not? Because at a point early on in this episode, he's so far down the rabbit hole of his emotional being manipulated and everything like that. And then when you get to the aspect of the fear he shows a little bit when he's threatened to lose those emotions, it really made you play. It's like, how is this gonna play out here? What's gonna happen? Yeah. And it's one of the times when Star Trek is really good at writing with one of their main characters where we were like, oh, it's all going to work out in the end, but they leave you questioning it for a while. And and I think that's the example of how good the writing was in this episode, that you're watching this and going, wow, they really played it up to where you weren't quite sure at one point, was this going to work out in a positive way for everybody? And I think they handled it beautifully.
Amy.
Yeah, it's almost laughable at how bonk bonk on the head Lore is, and his lying to the Borg and lying to himself, obviously, and lying to Picard and everyone, like, oh, these are free people. They can think what they want. Oh, why did you disconnect from, sharing your thoughts? You need to get back online. Like, it's laughable. Now as an adult that I've seen, unfortunately, too many politicians try and, oh, I'll take care of you. Don't you worry. Just follow me.
I
Like,
was gonna go there.
yeah, and I'm just like, how can people and agree and follow but we know Laura's controlling them.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm so sympathetic to how the Borg were when Laura did find them. That has to be scary. Like you're saying, children with emotions. This is children with independent thought. And we all know, well, I'm a school teacher for 24 years. I can tell you it's scary when little ones get independent thoughts thinking they know everything.
Mhm.
So it's a lesson in social dynamics. And I love watching this, specifically part 2, because of that.
Well, I'm glad you brought those points up there, Amy, because you know when when you had talked about you touched on the political aspect of things, that gets into the next topic that I want to discuss regarding the first of a few here
Mhm.
discussion points. Lore is manipulating Data and his emotions, and of course his followers as well. And there's an interesting little uh, conversation here when Troy and Jordan and them are captured, and Troy goes, "Data, all I'm sensing from you is anger and hatred. Have you felt any other emotions?" Data says, "There are no other emotions."
Mm.
Geordi says, "Data, just because you haven't experienced certain emotion doesn't mean they don't exist. Laura is only feeding you the negative ones." Data says, "Counselor Troy herself told me that feelings are not negative or positive, as you alluded to earlier, Amy. It is how we act on them that make them good or bad." Now, what I find when I found this and I was looking at these notes and putting them in here and stuff, I'm like, Lore's basically a cult leader. That's what he is basically, and he has taken advantage of people at low times and promised to help them, and show them his way, not the way, but his way. And you can kind of see this big mirror showing, shining right back. A lot of current times going on right now.
Mhm.
Things that have happened in the past, and unfortunately have led to also other, people following leaders and dying underneath them, and not
Mhm.
realizing till it's too late. And I thought this was a clever way to kind of showcase one of the most popular characters of Star Trek succumbing to this in a more of a sci-fi way, of course. But it is basically a mirror of what human race has been through for thousands of years. So
Yes.
I just want to kind of get your thoughts more, Kyle, on this topic here of Lore manipulating Data and his motions, as rest of the other Borg.
As a famous song once said, "Look in my eyes, what do you see? The cult of personality." And that's Lore is in this episode, he is the perfect example of that. He is controlling people with his personality and obviously using tech as emotion.
Just want to say, Kyle, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm very happy that you just dropped Living Color, one of my favorite hair bands of the 80s.
Yeah.
Well done.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Check out the Hair Metal Podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network. Kevin does a phenomenal job there. But this is why Laura is scary in this episode. I mean, Laura has always kind of been a bit over the top villain when we've ever seen him in Star Trek before, and sometimes he's a little bit hard to take seriously because of how over the top Brent has always played him. But in here, his over the topness and his attempts at master manipulation over the Borg, over Data, even over the crew in some aspects, just putting the fear into them because of his control. And like you said, it's a cult leader. It's a David Koresh, those kind of people. It's like, I'm going to find these people when they're at their weakest and exploit that. And then you add in the Data, who is his brother, who he knows his weakness. He knows how much Data wants to have that emotion and have that connection, and he uses that to corrupt his own brother. And again, he finds ways to justify it within himself and say, and in his own mind, even though he's saying, "Oh, well, they're free people. They're free people," but he knows in his own mind they're free people because I allow them to think they're free people.
Right.
Really not. They're under my control, and that's what makes him so evil in this episode. And it reflects on politicians, on just a big part of our society. Because I honestly think it's more than just politicians. You talk about people who are influencers, even in some cases, certain celebrities. It's using your power, in whatever form you have it, to control people. And in a way, like with the Borg, it's going from one hive mind of a true hive mind of the collective to a different type of hive mind of a cult hive mind. And it's a really interesting thing to see.
Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I like that. It's just that sliding scale, and the collective to a cult is just one step away. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. All right, the next topic I want to talk about, guys, is the return of Hugh. Love this. He says, hasn't the crew of the Enterprise caused enough damage already? What he says, it says that you put us in the position, you made it possible for lore to dominate us. Jonathan Del Arco returning as Hugh. And I love how when we have that Borg episode and he shows individuality, he befriends Geordi. Wonderfully played by Jonathan. I remember getting to meet him once. Really, really sweet guy. And of course, he returned later on in Trek, which I loved. I want to get your thoughts on the return of Hugh, Amy.
Yeah, this was a character that we needed to have a follow-up through. And I love that we got a follow-up in TNG because he comes back and he just explains. And what I love about it, especially when I was watching it again, and it was like Picard specifically did not send Hugh back with a virus to destroy everyone, not even thinking that the virus of independence. And so when you hear Hugh say, you left us a mess, but it's like, it's that freedom that was a mess, being released from the Borg Queen, and sadly only to be scooped back up by another crazy person. But and for him, and to describe the turmoil and the stress and the lost feeling, I loved it. And it only makes sense to see Hugh show up in Picard in the Borg reclamation part of that story, and how apropos, and for Picard at the end of this, no, there's a leader in you, Hugh. It is a beautiful story of, I don't want to get too counselor, but leaving a bad environment and building who you are, getting out from under this, I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. But it's a very beautiful story that we get with Hugh, and I'm glad that it continues in Picard.
I feel like, Amy, you just came up with a great song name or band name. Opening up for Def Leppard is Virus of Independence.
That's a metal thrash band right there.
Yeah.
Kyle, your thoughts on Hugh?
So what if I were to say that, in my opinion, Hugh might be one of the truest from beginning to end, from where we see him in his first appearance in Next Generation to where he ends in Picard. We see him literally grow up and live a life before our eyes more than any other Star Trek character. Because you think about it, he's basically a child when we first see him. He's all of a sudden he has this independence. He's learning, he's growing. In these episodes, I kind of see him maybe as that angry teenager, college years thing, just angry with the situation he's been put in, angry with what's happened. happened and being defiant in a way. And then when we see Hugh at the end of Picard, he's lived some life. He has some experiences now, and he's understanding of a lot more situations. And I really do feel like Hugh was one of those characters they took from beginning to end, and we saw his whole character growth from literally birth to the end. And it was done very well, especially when you consider the transformation of the Borg from when we first saw them to where we saw them at the end of Picard.
Yes, spoiler alert, he gets killed, right? He gets killed in Picard, right?
Correct.
Yeah, because someone's going after the Borg parts, basically. And
Yeah.
that, of course, brings in Seven of Nine's concern and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. I just want to add to exactly what you said, Kyle. That was beautiful. But he was living a true Trek philosophy life, because he could have so easily blamed the Borg and been angry and hateful, but he turned it into helping others and helping those in a similar situation. Beautiful.
Yeah, well said. Okay, guys, the last topic I want to touch on, Descent Part 2, is, as you alluded to earlier, Kyle, probably one of Beverly Crusher's best roles in Star Trek TNG, the series. She's had a lot of ones, but this one for me stands out as well. But what really, really makes it important for me is, so she takes command of the Enterprise with a cat and mouse game versus a rogue Borg ship. She implements a process called metaphasic shielding, which is a callback to a previous episode. She takes command. She takes the recommendation of Ensign Tate to induce a solar fusion eruption to destroy the Borg ship. So she's listening to her crew. They're working together. You're really getting that. There's a little, of course, pushback of one of the crew members here, Lieutenant Barnaby, who we'll talk to in a second. But the throwback to the episode, of course, is the really good one that I love. And you could say that this is also maybe one of the better Crusher episodes. This is arguably a really good one. Is the season 6, episode 2, Suspicions, where Dr. Crusher puts her career on line to prove a scientist, a Ferengi scientist, Dr. Rega, his theoretical new shielding technology, which may cost him his life. And in related trivia, the actor who plays Lieutenant Barnaby in this episode, James Horan, also played Dr. Joe Brill in Suspicions. He turned out, if you look at the picture here on YouTube, he's the one on the right. He's the one that turns out that kills Dr. Rega and tries to steal it. And the first episode featuring the invention of the metaphasic shielding, which allows a ship to enter the corona of a sun. In this episode, Dr. Crusher suggests using the same metaphasic shielding to hide the Enterprise in the sun's corona to escape the Borg ship. I just want to mention, by the way, James Horan, wonderful guy. Follow him on Facebook. Got a chance to meet him, out of all places, at a Highlander convention in LA, because he had a very pivotal episode where he played a very old immortal, where our lead, Duncan MacLeod, almost dies in it because of his fight with him. And I interviewed him briefly in his work on Star Trek, but he also was one of the Krill characters where Malloy and Ed have to dress up as Krill and infiltrate the ship. He was
the leader, right? He was like the captain.
He was the spiritual leader, because they had to get that spiritual book, that Avis, made them all.
Yes, yes.
But that was James Horan as well. I'll mention him a little bit more later on. But, yeah, great guy here. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on the Beverly episode, her performance in this. She takes command and she kicks ass. Amy?
Yeah. It's very interesting how they decided to show her leadership style compared to everyone else who sat in that chair. First of all, when she was giving commands, it was very metered. It was very calm. And I'm wondering if it was because if she would have raised her voice or shown any excitable, that it comes off as, oh, she's crazy. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's not going to be effective. Because back then, we still have this crazy lady mentality that people saw women in power as, a biatch. So it was just interesting watching that. But her connection and making the crew feel at ease. We know that's what she does in her in the medical, what's that called? Med offices,
Yeah.
medical bay.
Yeah. Sick bay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sick bay.
You know, because of how she always talks to Nurse Ogawa, and you know, like it's this community, and the bridge has never felt more. I'm going to help you. You're going to help me. I mean, there was a little tit for tat, like a competition of, well, I guess I'll get my calculations correct, Lieutenant. You know, that is super cute. It's a little competitive, but it's not getting in the way of making things work, because she builds this community on the bridge that, man, I would definitely want to be on the bridge with Crusher for sure. Like, she is a great captain. And I love the trivia. Thank you, Kevin. I did not know that that was Jabril from the same episode. What an amazing, how awesome to be called back. It's like, oh, would you like to be in this episode? That's sort of a continuation of what you played on. That's pretty cool.
You know, I just want to say, like, you know, I've been doing a rewatch of the Orville season 1, and we know how Yaphet has a crush on Claire, always coming in trying to fight. I gotta tell you, if I was an extra or if I was on the Enterprise, I'd be finding a way to get to the doctor's office, because I was crushing on Crusher the entire series that she was on. I've always liked Beverly Crusher.
Yep.
Kyle, your thoughts on Crusher killing it as the captain of the Enterprise here?
There's so much with this, because, you know, I think sometimes TNG, when they had the stronger Crusher episodes, they had a tendency to sometimes still play her off as like a little bit weak, because she's still, you know, of the trauma she went through with losing her husband, then Wesley leaving, and things of that nature. Why I think this is such, in my opinion, the best Crusher episode, as far as just because she doesn't panic. She stays even keeled, just like a doctor in surgery stays even keeled, and that's how she's acting in this. But I think one of the most brilliant decisions they had in this was the fact you didn't have any of the other major bridge crew with her on the bridge. She was running the show. There was nobody. There wasn't a Worf there. There wasn't a Riker there or somebody. It was Beverly in control, and you see some moments where she kind of has to stop and catch herself a little bit. But when she finds that groove and gets everybody working on the same page, and how she gets the team together, just like a doctor would with the surgical staff. And I think it was a turning point for Star Trek in how we saw the Doctor characters as well, because, you know, who would have really thought McCoy would be good in the captain's chair? I really think, like we talked about a couple episodes ago with Troy, and, you know, with the everything with the Jellicoe, and her really kind of stepping up in that and standing her ground there. This was the moment that Crusher really just went up a level, and you realize they really put the shine on her, and you realize she's a lot more than just a doctor. This is a woman who is very much captain material without question, and not just if you had to put her on a medical ship. She is just captain material in general, and there's so much more to Beverly Crusher than I think anybody ever appreciated until this moment. And I think it just made a lot of people see Crusher in a whole new light after this episode.
Just to clarify, you know, she wasn't just a doctor. She wasn't just a dancing doctor too. Honestly, my favorite part of this second episode is all the Crusher parts, and her, you know, just unifying that, you know, young Ensign Tate, who's nervous about, you know, being in all this, and listening to her, and it was great. So,
let's be honest too. Truthfully, when you go back to the original, when that airing episode, how many people went, "Oh God, the Enterprise is screwed with Crusher in the captain's chair"? How many people probably thought that?
Right.
I didn't.
At the time.
I you know, because I don't know, I look back and I look at all the times that she made key decisions, and whether it was medical related, or, you know, when they're at, you know, when they're in the ready room talking to Picard and stuff like that. She always had her moments. So yeah, but I'm sure there's some people that did. So yeah. All right, guys, this is the Union Federation, and we, of course, are talking about all the two-part episodes here on Star Trek. And there's a reason why. Well, because I found a great interview here, or excuse me, a great article on Screen Rant by Dalton Norman. Did this great article that inspired this podcast here back in 2022. And so, yeah, we're going through all the two-part episodes here. And what he says about this one, I think, is interesting because we're going to highlight the lead in this. And that, of course, is Brent Spiner. Dalton goes on to say, while they only appeared in a few times in TNG, the Borg proved to be one of the strongest alien races in the entire franchise. Descent finds the crew once again in conflict with the Borg. But to everyone's surprise, both the Borg and Data experienced a range of human emotions that they hadn't previously shown. Digging into why they are suddenly feeling things, the crew encounters another old foe in form of Data's brother, Lore. Data's flirtation with human emotion was a thread throughout the entire series, and it was interesting to see him experiencing them in the episodes. The Borg are just as frightening as ever, but the added wrinkle of emotion adds an element of humanity that lessened their usual impact. The heart of the episode was Brent Spiner's terrific turn as both Data and Lore, and he was able to imbue both characters with their own distinct personalities on screen. Now, I want to basically celebrate Brent Spiner here because obviously he played against himself here. There's some great moments here. But I did want to say, Kyle, you kind of mentioned like how the Borg were being perceived, and some people were kind of maybe not feeling it. And I think he says that here. The Borg are just as frightening ever, but with the added wrinkle of emotion as an element in humanity that lessened their usual impact. So I want you to touch on that first, and also, of course, talk about Brent Spiner's, acting in this.
Okay, well, let me just touch on the Borg part first, because I heard this a lot too when Picard was going on and talking about how people weren't quite sure about this evolution that the Borg went through. And I think believe if we go back and listen to those episodes, we even had that discussion to where the Borg were such a cool villain. And there was something about them when they were the hive mind and just nothing was going to stop them. And it's that fear of like, no matter what you do, you feel like they're just going to keep coming. It's the Michael Myers effect. No matter what you do to Michael Myers, he's going to keep coming. And the Borg had that fear to them. And I think when you start humanizing them, and for some people, I think taking away that fear aspect of the Borg and what the Borg would do to you kind of took away the menacing aspect of it. And I get what Star Trek was trying to do. They're trying to evolve the Borg into something else. But there's something to be said of just about having that villain or that threat that every time they show up, you're like, oh crap. That's your instant reaction. It's like that one villain in the comic book is like, oh my God, it's this guy again, or something like that. And I think that's what the Borg were in Next Generation. They were that villain that more than the Cardassians, more than the Romulans, more than anything. It's like when the Borg show up, it's an oh crap moment, because what are we going to do? And now to see them in this way where they are scattered, being manipulated, being turned into puppets in a way that is different. And you feel, I think people just saw it as a weakening of the Borg in an aspect.
I think that's done intentionally, though, Kyle. I really
think it was intentional. I think it was an intentional choice.
I mean, we got obviously First Contact, where we got this kind of other splinter group with the Borg Queen, but I think they were trying to, everything kind of evolves, and they don't want to, how often are we going to keep getting the same bad guys over and over again? So I think it was done intentionally, but like you're alluding to, it rubbed some people the wrong way, I'm sure. So yeah. But Amy, yeah.
Well, going on to that, Kyle, I think, again, you bring up such amazing good points. Mm-hmm. So we have the Borg, and really, this is the first time that more than one is vulnerable. Like, we get a name with Hugh, but before, the Borg weren't vulnerable. We could kill them, and that was maybe if we could change our phasers to the different, phase beams or whatever. Like, we couldn't kill them, and we wanted to kill them. And it's not until you take away, oh, they're the main nemesis, they're the enemy, and we start seeing them as, oh, they're just being manipulated. Oh, they are a collective. They aren't even individuals. And so when we see them after the effects of Hugh, and we have Hugh describing, like, now we have sympathy, and not every alien race gets to have that sympathy from us. But that's what it takes to remove this, ooh, they're the bad ones. Like, when you relate, then we get to not have them as enemies. And maybe we can work together. And we see in Picard, which I love that storyline of Girardi's Borg, because they're working together. And you're right, the teeth gets removed from them. And I hope, that's never a criticism. I hope that everyone can have their nemesis, have their teeth removed, that you can find some way to connect with your enemy, because that's what's going to remove the hatred and the killing and everything.
Well, as I mentioned in the article, that the heart of this episode was Brent Spiner's terrific turn as both Data and Lore. I want to get you guys' comments on his performance, Kyle.
This is probably Brent Spiner's performance, these 2 episodes, because of working off of himself with Data and Lore, and the different emotions he's having to play, because he has to go from Data with no emotions to Data like feeling emotions and having to deal with all of that, to then the manipulation of Data, and this manipulation to going to the pure evil cult leader type style of Lore, to also having to play Data as he's experiencing these emotions and going through all these things. And you have Lore in an aspect, kind of this controlled emotional evil, while Data is this pure force of nature emotional evil when he's corrupted, and where he's just, it's the flash flood has hit him in that emotion. And then when they reactivate his conscious per se, then to see him struggling with that, I mean, Spiner just is amazing in this episode. And to do both of those characters, I can't imagine the emotional drain after filming these episodes it was on him. And he probably said, I need to not be the center of attention in episodes for the rest of this, for several episodes, please, because I need to get my brain right again. But it's a tour de force by Brent Spiner here, without question.
Amy.
So, can I ask you a question? Do you feel that Data playing Data with emotion is different
than
Data playing Data?
I think so, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you feel that he was over the top playing the emotions?
I think he was over the top, but in a necessary way, because again, he's experiencing these emotions for the first time, and it's overwhelming. So it was the right way to go, because again, it's not like, oh, all of a sudden I have emotions and he doesn't know how to deal with these emotions, and he's got this manipulative force with him, which isn't helping, because he's only making him feel certain types of emotions with the dial turned up to 1,000.
I think too, and I'm sure you can ask any counselor or anyone that knows anything about talking with people and their emotions. The easiest emotion to feel is hate. And that is put on center stage here, anger. And I think that someone who's not used to feeling it will encapsulate it and embrace it, and hear key words of, individuality and promises by his brother, of course, who's pulling the strings on him as well. But I definitely saw the difference between Data, evil Data, and Lore. And the evil Data, you see it snap, you see it happen with Corrosis, However, he was being affected before that, and that might have had something to do with it as well. So it was. I thought it was fascinating. What do you think, Amy?
I guess I'm just not that impressed with Brent Spiner's acting, but I love it. I just wouldn't have thought about it as much, and I just don't see the difference enough. Yeah, I do worry about his morality and like how quickly Lore could turn that off and deactivate that. And like to me, that's where my brain went. Like that's a rabbit hole that we don't want Data
Yeah.
turning off that morality, because he could do some damage. Yeah.
But and again, I think that goes back to the conversation in the first part with Troy too. But the other way I kind of interpreted this, and I'm curious if you guys can see where I'm coming from. When I hear people, Data's getting emotions was like somebody taking a drug for the first time. It was an experience he's never had, and how it made him feel without understanding there were other aspects out there. It became in a way its own addiction, and because he had never experienced for the first time, it was this overwhelmingness of it. And yeah. I think that's a big part of it, is that especially when he goes back to his fear. And it is fear. He's carrying his own emotional fear of what the emotion chip did to him. That's why he wants to destroy it, because he's scared of what it's going to do to him. So he's even still feeling an emotion after the chip is taken out. And it's his own friend who says, no, this is something you should have available to you, but under the right circumstances and not where you were being manipulated and controlled.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny when it comes to the emotion chip here, and that's going to get into our next discussion here, the emotion chip. I was remembering the scene when Data brings to Lore Geordi's visor. He says, "Why did you want this?" And, Lore goes, "Well, I thought it would look good on me." And he laughs, and then Lore says, "We need to work on your sense of humor." And in the back of my mind, I'm like, why don't you just bring back Joe Piscopo? He kind of explained a little bit. So well, let's get into the other related topic here. Data and his emotion chip. I just want to read off some related trivia here. And it's something you mentioned before I think we started recording, Amy. The picture that I have here of Data's emotion chip is actually from Generations. This is from the Star Trek card game, by the way. And yes, it is different from the chip that we see at the end of Descent Part 2. They changed it. So plain and simple. Data removes Lore's emotion chip. This chip would later be installed in himself in Star Trek Generations, 1994. The end of the season is implied that Data would eventually begin to use the emotion chip, as shown in the alternate future timeline of All Good Things, 1994, in which he remarks that his housekeeper makes him laugh. The emotion chip was seen in Star Trek Generations 94, where it became fused into Data's neural net, forcing him to learn to deal with having emotions on a permanent basis. He eventually gains the ability to deactivate, and later removes the chip completely in Star Trek First Contact 96 and Insurrection 98. Now, I bring this up, guys, because there's an article that I found by Mark Donaldson on Screen Rant a couple of years ago, 2022, saying the emotion chip. The article basically said, what happened to the emotion chip in the TNG movies? Kind of showing that why didn't they play up more on that after Generations? The emotion chip was a big part of his character arc in the TVs and movies. And, obviously we saw it used in Generations, and he turns it off in First Contact. It makes sense that the resolution of Data's emotion chip arc was saved for movies, given that they were intended to bring the TNG crew's adventures to a satisfying conclusion. However, the TNG movies failed to tackle the idea of Data experiencing emotions in an interesting way. The best example of the emotional state was Descent. And, he goes on to talk about, what could have been, and, would have been more interesting to see him maybe in Insurrection, using it a little bit more. And he ends off saying that the chip overruling Data's positonic brain, leading him to experience erratic emotions during the attack on a space station in Generations, putting Geordi's life at risk. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Should we have seen a lot more of him experiencing it in all of the movies? compared to what we have seen since Star Trek Picard. Kyle?
This is where I think a little bit of Hollywood kicks in here, because I think the fear, I have a suspicion that the fear might have been, if we deal with Data's emotion chip, it could take away from what the main plot is of the film that we're putting out, because so many people would be more interested in that
Yep.
than the main plot of the film. To me, Insurrection would have been the perfect film to really deal with Data's emotion chip, considering what they were dealing with in that film. I think it works well in First Contact, because he does turn off the emotion chip before encountering the Borg. And they could have played up a little bit more with that, with his whole interactions with the Borg Queen, which they do somewhat by giving him the human skin at that.
Can I mention you said real quick regarding Insurrection? The writer does say it would have been a fascinating way to give Data added character motivation for joining Picard's uprising against Insurrection's corrupt Starfleet admiral.
Yeah, and I just felt like that would have been the film to really deal with it. But like I said, I really think it was one of those things to where it was like, we can't deal with this because it's going to take away too much from our main movie plot, because people will be so fascinated by it.
Is it also too because we like Data not completely understanding emotion, and
I think
you find endearing about him?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing of that. People wanted the Data they watched on the show and came to love on the show. A Data with full emotions is not that same character. And so,
Amy, what do you think?
Again, Kyle, I would love to see that explored in Insurrection. Wow, that's really, I love that idea. And well, the writers of Generation, Rick Berman, they have been definitely on oh my gosh. They've been known to say that they did not want to give Data emotions. Like, he's our Spock. He's how we view us, because we're trying to figure out our emotions. We don't need him to have emotions. He's that stepping stone. And so when they wrote that, I know that they hated it. They didn't want to do it. But they were told that was a movie thingy and you are going to do this. So I like ish that he gets to just flip a switch. And it was sort of interesting that he couldn't turn off his emotions. They definitely needed to delve way deeper into that. The humor thing was not funny. I mean, it is, but there's way more emotions than that. Kyle?
I just want to say, kind of, at least for my sum up of this, as far as Data's emotions in this episode, and I think even through the remainder of Trek, but especially in this two-parter, with everything we've talked about, you talk about how villains will say, "Oh, emotions are what make you weak. Not having emotions is what makes you strong." Hence, the threat of the Borg early on, when they're basically this emotionless thing that's moving forward. And then you see them getting emotions. A lot of people felt weak in the Borg, and yet we see also the opposite side of that argument too. Is, oh, well, the emotions sort of define me. That's what makes me strong. And we see that with the human characters, but we see that with Data up and down throughout from this emotion chip on, because he's learning to identify himself. And when he does get the emotion chip back later, and he's got a little bit better control of it, it helps him define who he is. But then I think when we talk about the wasted opportunity, being able to just have him be able to turn it on and off like a light switch, that's a cheap, easy way out.
Yeah.
And what I think is more, that's something they could have played upon too, because people who can have that ability to kind of turn their emotions on and off, or have that much control of their emotions, they can sometimes be the scariest people in the world, because because they can have such control over their own emotional state. And in this case, Data can literally turn it on and off like a light switch. And so there's so many missed opportunities with it. well.
Interesting MacGuffin there, that emotional chip. So on to the next thing, guys. I always like to let you know if there's any deleted scenes when it comes to the Blu-ray editions here, and there was 2 deleted scenes in only episode 2, but they weren't anything really worth noting. There was a redundant scene of Data talking about emotions, and then I think there was a brief scene of Geordi being taken out of the torture chair, as we call it. Nothing too big. So, but I did want to get into the next thing, guys. Let's talk a little Star Trek trivia. All right. Well, as we always do, we'll take some turns here. Why don't you go first there, Amy, with part 1 trivias that we have here.
All right. Well, this episode is the 3rd time, this is a good trivia, that the Enterprise D is commanded by a female officer, Beverly Crusher. Tasha Yar was the first, while Commander Riker was supervising repairs at the holodeck in The Big Goodbye. Deanna Troi was in command during disaster as the highest ranking officer known to be alive as the ship was struck by quantum filaments.
Kyle, hit us with the next one, then I'll go next.
The Borg building, the Brandy Spartan Institute in real life, was also used as Camp Kittimer in Star Trek 4 or Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country in 1991.
The first instance in which the holodeck safety protocols were asked to be disabled. In this instant, Data says it takes 2 command level officers to disable the safety protocols. In other series, it would change to a single command level officer.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan Del Arco had previously had no exposure to Star Trek, much less the Borg, prior to being cast in iBorg in 1992. Afterwards, he was keen to return and pitched several story ideas to the producers, one of which he says was quite similar to Descent's story. Interesting.
Kyle?
The Borg building in the... Well, okay. It's going back to the Borg building. You know what's probably most famous for, guys? It was the command center in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Go, go, you Power Rangers.
Never watched that show. I just kind of was, I was just a little older. And so, yeah, I never noticed that. That's interesting. All right. Let's get for part 2 trivia here. I'll start us off. Jonathan Del Arco, who played here, auditioned originally for the part of Wesley Crusher at the beginning of Star Trek Next Generation 1987. So what could have been?
Sliding doors.
I'm sorry. I went down a rabbit hole. Can you tell me where we are?
Oh, yeah. Part 2 trivia.
Okay.
Down there. Yeah, there you go. In the early draft.
Okay. In an early draft, Lieutenant Reginald Barclay, who was played by Dwight Schultz, took the place of Ensign Tate. The change was made due to availability and cost issues. Oh, darn it. He was too expensive.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. That would have been cool.
Kevin, I think you should take I actually think you should take this trivia.
Okay.
Yes.
James Horan, Lieutenant Barnaby, in this episode has appeared in all 4 Star Trek spin-off television series. 12 total appearances.
Wow.
And a partridge in a pear tree with the Orville as well. So there you
yes.
go.
Now, I find this one incredibly interesting. Along with Unification 2 and Gambit Part 1, this is one of only 3 episodes in which Captain Picard is never seen aboard the Enterprise.
Wow. Yeah. That's right. Wait, he's not on the Enterprise in episode 2.
Oh, okay. What? And we don't see him on it at the very end? That's just Geordi and Data.
Yeah.
That is interesting trivia. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Isn't that weird? Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy, get us with the last one here.
All right. The first draft of the script had Data kill Lore in self-defense with a phaser, but the producers insisted on a less overt method. Interesting.
That's right. Okay, guys, we've got one more away mission to wrap things up. Okay. One of the things we like to do, of course, is talk about the guest stars and the cast here. And let's go ahead and start off right with our guest stars here. And we have obviously some great ones here with John Neville, who played Isaac Newton, Jim Norton, who played Albert Einstein. And of course, we had Mr. Stephen Hawking as himself. And we also had Jonathan Del Arco as the Borg, Borg Hugh. And then we had, who else do we have here? We had Brian Cousins played Corrosis, the other scary Borg there. And we also had,
yeah,
Alana Nechayev returns there as well. Yeah. And then we also, of course, we talked about James Horan. Who else did we have here?
And then
Alex,
Ensign Tate. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex Datcher played Ensign Zandra Tate. So, yeah, there you go. Guys, want to get your thoughts on the guest stars. Amy, start with you.
Yeah. Okay. Alex Datcher. Okay. She just stills every scene that she's in. I love her look. I love her scariness. Like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm just here. But yet she still does her job. Fake it till you make it. I think she's fabulous. And I want to know if I know her from anything else. And I'm not seeing anything that I would know her from.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to highlight her because I just think she's great.
She was good. Yeah. Kyle, what about you?
Well, anytime Jonathan Del Arco shows up, that's always a wonderful thing. And as I said earlier, Brian Cousins is Corrosis. I mean, he's just pure evil. I mean, yes, he might be being manipulated, but that performance he pulls off in episode 1, manipulating Data, is it's bone chilling down to its core, and it's just such a spotlight moment right there. And I got to give it to both John Neville and Jim Norton as Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. You could tell they kind of nailed those parts, and they were having some fun with it too.
For those of you that don't know, remember a little movie called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen?
Oh,
well, Isaac Newton is Baron Munchausen. There you go. Yeah, John Neville. And we lost him. He was born in 1925. We lost him in 2011. So he's been around for a while there. Yeah. I love Natalia Nogalich as Alana Nechayev. I just love how she just comes in for a hot minute and rips Picard a new one.
Yep.
she's like the only person I think that really in command can just really hold an over on Picard. She's just great. I love it. I don't have a picture of him, but I do want to give a shout out to someone here. Dennis Matalone. He's a stuntman. He was the main stunt coordinator too, I think, going into definitely Voyager. And he's been one of the stunt coordinators all through Star Trek. And he's kind of started off as doing some extra work, and he played some uncredited Borg in this. But I want to give a shout out to the stunt people here. And Dennis Matalone, you get to see him a lot more in other stuff. He plays off, some aliens or people on other planets, and he pops up here. He has a distinctive face, and his nickname is Dennis Danger Matalone. So I want to give a shout out to him as well, though. So yeah. All right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap things up here. This, of course, is Star Trek: The Next Generation, Descent Part 1 and 2. Of course, enjoying these 2-part episodes as we look back on the nostalgia of Star Trek. I want to get your final thoughts and, of course, your ranking here. What kind of impact did this have on you watching it recently? And give me your ranking. IMDb ranks Part 1 of Descent at an 8.1. and ranks Part 2 as a 7.8, so a little less. But I want to get you guys to rank both of them together as one episode, and your final thoughts. Let's start with you, Amy.
All right. Okay. This one's tricky because I like so much of it, and then the whole lore thing, that's the part that I get bored with. So,
it's interesting how that changes after a while, because I think I'm on the same plane. I don't mean to interrupt you, but
yeah,
that is so important that you said that, because you start noticing other things about it because we've seen the lore thing so much.
Right. Exactly. I sort of like the story with Riker and Worf going off together and running into Hugh, and so we're getting the different sides of the Borg, and we see that they've got the two sides. I love, of course, the Troy parts of it. Very, very impactful. The Crusher is amazing. That's a lovely story in Descent Part 2. So I'm going to give these This two-parter, I'm going to be similar to the IMDb, and I'm going to go 8.0.
8. Straight up 8. 80, even 8. All right. I like that. Kyle, what about you? Final thoughts and ranking.
I think again for Brent Spiner, this is up there as far as like data performances in these two episodes. I agree with the lore thing because I really did feel by at this point seeing lore again. I understand the importance of it, but lore kind of becomes a broken record kind of villain aspect to the and truthfully, we all know that Peanut Hamper and Agamus are the true ultimate AI villains of Star Trek.
Wait, the who?
Peanut Hamper and Agamus are the true ultimate AI villains of Star Trek.
Hey, Lower Deck shout out.
Lower Decks, yep.
A great performance by Gates McFadden in episode 2, and it's not quite at the level of some of the other two-parters like Best of Both Worlds, Time Zero, or others. But it's still strong. I agree with Amy. This is a conflicting one because there's some really good things, but there's some things about it that just kind of drags it down a little. For Brent Spiner's performance alone in the moment with Beverly Crusher, I'm going to give this a little bit higher than what Amy did. I'm going 8.2.
Okay. 8.2 for Kyle. Okay. All right. It's funny. I was looking at the IMDb rating of 8.1 for part 1 and 7.8 for part 2. And I'm sure by now, I mean, with people still adding to their own reviews, these might fluctuate later on. But I think, this is what we're going with as, we put this podcast together. But as a rewatch, though, obviously you remember lore. Remember Data going evil. But those weren't the things that I enjoyed the most. We've touched on this a little bit. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that good old Kevin, if you're going to entertain Kevin, you're going to throw some callbacks in, and you're not just going to mention it, but you're going to make it pay off. And this is the Suspicions episode that revolved around Beverly kind of basically almost, losing her job at Federation, turning into a cool little mystery. And then that coming back with the metaphasic shielding. And, and just also too, I feel like, is it just me, Amy? But now that Troy has her uniform, her spacesuit, as Marina calls it, I feel like she's getting some extra counseling and killing it in her counseling scenes.
Right? First with Picard and his being tortured, and
it's just the 2-part episodes. But I feel like she's getting her real burn here with that. And showing some of my favorite moments. And that Corrosis scene, I was just drawn into that scene, and I really, really like it. But 2, to bring back Hugh and to let the Federation know that a lot of people are looking at Picard going, dude, you effed up there, bro. Could have killed it. Could have sent back a virus. But as Amy said, a virus of what?
Yeah. Independence.
I love that. Yeah. So I'm going to actually bump it up. I'm going to go 8.4 for those reasons. It bumps it up for me because I love it when you go back and review something that you've watched, rewatch a favorite movie of yours, and you notice something new, or you come to appreciate something a little differently than you did when you first watched it, especially when you watch stuff when you're younger, and now you watch it when you get older and your perspective changes a little bit. This is the stuff that I mentioned that really kind of gravitated towards. So, yeah. All right, guys, let's wrap it up. This is the Union Federation on the Fandom Podcast Network and, of course, the BQN. And we are, of course, celebrating all the 2-part episodes. And, guys, we have one more left. And what's really interesting about it is I felt like season 7 was like, okay, not only do we get our banger, series finale in at the end of the year, but we really got to do another 2-part episode. And 3 episodes later, after this one, in the last season, we get Gambit Part 1 and 2, episode 197 coming soon. So looking forward to talking about that. This is the Fandom Podcast Network. My name is Kevin. You can find me, of course, on all the socials at Spartan_Phoenix. Find me on Facebook as well. Kyle, where can we find you?
You can find me, of course, on all over the Fandom Podcast Network with all of our great shows. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at AKyleW. You can find me on Discord at AKyleW. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. But right now, what you can find me doing is activating my emotion chips and going to go listen to some Living Color.
I love that. And also, please, if you're listening to this podcast, please check us out on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel. We'd appreciate a subscribe, give us some comments, shout us out there. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on Twitter and on X and Instagram, as well as Union Federation. Follow us on Instagram and X there as well. Amy, what are you doing at BQN? How can we find you and reach out to you?
Well, you can also find us on YouTube. Just search BQN and we would love a subscribe there. And that's where we will be having our View Screen Sunday magazine show, a little talk show that we do covering fun topics of Star Trek. And that's Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific. You can find me on Facebook at our Union Federation Facebook page. Also, our BQN Collective Facebook page and the BQN Discord server is where I like hanging out there too.
Nice. Yeah, I have Discord account as well. Spartan
Yeah.
_ Phoenix. Pretty cool. All right, guys. Thank you again so much, Amy and Kyle. Thank you, guys. Until next time on the Union Federation podcast, live long and prosper. And without a doubt, we are the weirdest ship in the fleet. Until next time, guys. See you soon.